Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. We are very appreciative for you to joining us in this session today. As you can see in this slide, we are celebrating our 5th anniversary. It has been like a real experience on how time flies. We started back in 2020, we're in 2025, and lots of things had happened. And in this session, we're really very appreciative. We're very honored to have a very special guest from the World Trade Organization and also from AdvaMed, one of our executive committee members. And I would like just to drive you through what our agenda is going to look like for today. Just a second. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping messages. This session is being held in English language only in this occasion. We're going to be recording this session as we customarily do with all our coalition sessions, and will be made available at the coalition website, and we will send the link to all of you once it is uploaded. And as for the Q&A, we would like this to be a really interactive session, taking advantage of the experts that are joining us today. So please post your questions in the Q&A feature of the Zoom platform. We have the attendees' microphones closed just to prevent background noise, but we do not want that to be an impediment for this to be an interactive session. And as I was mentioning, today we are honored to have Daniela Garcia from the World Trade Organization and Stephen Bites from AdvaMed. And without further ado, I would like to invite Marina Carvalho, our GRP and trade lead for the coalition, to help us introduce and moderate the session with Daniela. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's a pleasure, and it's a really great moment for us to enjoy the 5th anniversary of the coalition. I think it's an important work that we develop here. And today we have a very special guest. Daniela Garcia is not only the chair of the WTO Technical Barriers to Trade Committee, but she's also a career foreign service diplomat. She has a very extensive track record of working with and building diverse cross-regional coalitions, so we have a lot to learn from her. Her strong capacities and numerous achievements in multilateral diplomacy in the areas of trade, the environment, and sustainable development are well recognized, including in the UN process and at the WTO. Daniela is bringing us today information on the WTO Technical Barriers to Trade Committee. It will be a pleasure to have you here. It's very interesting, and it's a great opportunity for us to be possible to pay attention to your thoughts and your comments in regarding to technical barriers to trade, good regulatory practices, and conformity assessment when it comes to medical devices. So Daniela is going to bring some initiatives to promote and facilitate global medical device regulatory standards and conformity assessment convergence and reliance. It's very important for us to have you here, Daniela. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to you, Marina, and thank you, Sandra. And well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all. Buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And Marina, you were so kind with your words. I'm here to learn from you. And congratulations for your amazing work. First of all, I would like to thank the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence for the kind invitation to speak at this event celebrating the 5th anniversary of the coalition. And of course, congratulations to you all on this important milestone. And I'm sorry that I cannot be there with you in person. I would have loved to. But thanks to digital technologies, we can have these meetings today. So I'm happy to be here. Regulatory convergence and reliance play an important role in reducing trade barriers and ensuring timely access to safe and effective medical technologies. Such regulatory cooperation is particularly important in times of pandemics and other public health emergencies. Emerging digital technologies further call for increased dialogue amongst regulators, with medical devices being increasingly enabled by software, creating novel interoperability, cybersecurity, and other regulatory challenges. In my presentation today, I would like to discuss how the WTO Agreement on Technical Barriers to Trade, the TBT Agreement, as supported by the work of the TBT Committee, plays a crucial role in enabling and promoting regulatory cooperation amongst regulators in the medical technology sector. Quite a very important sector. But before delving into specifics, I would like to briefly highlight that last year we had a lot of achievements at the ministerial ministerial conference in Abu Dhabi. WTO members reaffirmed the TBT agreement relevance to modern global trade challenges and emerging policy concerns, including measures taken to address human health in general and global health in pandemics in particular. They noted that close regulatory cooperation amongst members was fundamental in addressing the COVID pandemic by facilitating trade through the reduction or suspension of unnecessary regulatory barriers, use of international standards, of course, or temporary recognition of multiple standards and decreasing unnecessary cost. The agreement, as you all know, sets numerous obligations on WTO members, regulators, in relation to technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures, with the aim of ensuring a balance between governments' right to regulate for various legitimate public policy objectives, such as public health, of course, on one hand, and on the other, the need to avoid unnecessary and discriminatory regulatory interventions. Those two areas, those two issues are not contradicting each other. They can complement each other, and they are both important. I will focus on three ways in which the TBT agreement supports global regulatory convergence and reliance in the medical technology sector. First of all, harmonization. The TBT agreement requires members to use international standards as a basis for their TBT measures. Harmonization based on international standards fosters innovation, ensures safety and quality, and enables interoperability of medical technologies. Moreover, aligning regulations and conformity assessment procedures around a common global benchmark is key to avoiding regulatory fragmentation and thus reducing unnecessary barriers to trade. Second, the TBT agreement also envisages some important regulatory coherence tools. The agreement encourages our members to recognize foreign conformity assessment results, even when other members apply different procedures for assessing conformity, and negotiate mutual recognition agreements. Those two areas are very important. And Marina, you mentioned the recognition of CAP results and the importance of the guidelines that we have adopted last year. This also helped to streamline regulatory processes and reduce bottlenecks and duplications that can impede access to medical devices, so important for public health. Third, transparency. The TBT agreement also establishes a strong transparency framework, which helps regulators and the private sector to stay informed about regulatory development concerning medical devices in different international markets. Everything starts with transparency. Transparency brings solid foundations to the committee's work and to the work of members, regulators, and of course, stakeholders. The agreement transparency obligations, which cover the entire regulatory life cycle of regulations, put a particular focus on the early stages of these cycles. For instance, the agreement requires members to notify technical regulations and conformity assessment procedures to the WTO when they are still being prepared and drafted, so stakeholders can meaningfully submit comments and participate in this phase of policy making. And this is very important. And the agreement gives this opportunity for members to engage and puts a right framework. By ensuring timely access to information about existing or upcoming regulatory development concerning medical devices, the TBT transparency framework serves as a key building block for constructive engagement from early stages of regulatory process. Early access to regulatory information becomes even more important as medical devices are increasingly enabled by advanced digital technologies, such as AI, which means that regulations on these products needs to move fast to keep pace with constant changes and updates. To make sure transparency frameworks are even more effective, the WTO introduced an innovative ePIN, TBT, and SPS platform, which facilitates the tracking of these measures, both SPS and TBT measures, making it easier to receive information about upcoming regulatory requirements around the world. The ePIN makes it easy for business, particularly SMEs, to track a specific sector or market and offers several communication features to share information and discuss notified regulatory measures. The ePIN has been definitely a game changer in helping governments to provide prompt access to regulation, as well as to better communicate and engage with all interested stakeholders. Now, I would also like to say a few words about the TBT committee, which supports the implementation of the TBT agreement. Over the years, our members have been using the TBT committee as a global forum for regulatory cooperation and constructive discussions on regulatory matters relating to medical devices, as well as promoting good regulatory practice. Let me give you two concrete examples of recent developments in the committee, which are particularly important for the medical technology sector. First, the CAP guidelines. Last year, the TBT committee achieved a significant milestone. It adopted the practical guidelines to support regulators in the choice and design of conformity assessment procedure, CAPs, to ensure that such processes do not create unnecessary obstacles to international trade. These new non-prescriptive guidelines are supposed to serve as a trade facilitating tool, enhancing trust between different regulatory systems and facilitating the acceptance of results of conformity assessment. These guidelines include various elements in this area: harmonization based on international standards, confidence in conformity assessment bodies, transparency, as well as acceptance of results of conformity assessment, including through accreditations and MRAs. In terms of reliance, the CAP guidelines suggest that regulators may consider opportunities to rely on the work of other trusted regulators in order to make best use of available resources, the importance of collaboration and cooperation again. As WTO members start relying more on the recently adopted guidelines, I invite you to consider how these CAP guidelines could be used to improve conformity assessment and encourage reliance in the medical devices sector. The medical device regulatory thematic session. This March, the TBT committee held a thematic session on regulatory cooperation between members on medical device regulation. Members discussed the importance of regulatory cooperation and convergence for ensuring timely access to safe, effective medical devices, as well as how regulatory reliance helps to avoid duplication of efforts. The discussion also stressed the need for a stronger dialogue between trade and health authorities to ensure that health authorities are aware and comply with relevant disciplines under the TBT agreement. Members also highlighted the importance of promoting good regulatory practices across agencies involved in medical devices regulation to ensure reliance and convergence. The TBT agreement principles, including transparency, harmonization based on international standards, equivalence, and mutual recognition, were quoted as key tools to guide regulatory cooperation and reduce unnecessary trade barriers in the area of medical devices. I am so grateful to Sandra and the coalition for their participation in this session. It was delightful to have you there. And of course, we had a great moderator from Jamaica really guiding this session in a very in an amazing way. It was a session that really gave the members more information to discuss, and it reflects the importance that the committee gives to this area. There will be future opportunities for improving regulatory cooperation in this area, with the TBT committee organizing a thematic session on MRAs across various sectors in March next year. And we hope to count with the coalition participation, of course. I will leave you with these comments and this information about the importance of the agreement and the relevance to the medical devices sector, and of course the work of the committee. And your contribution is and will always be so important, so we count with your support and contribution in moving forward. Thank you so much y gracias a todos.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you so much for this introduction and your words on how the TBT committee has been working and how the TBT agreement is so important for the work that we develop here at the coalition. We have some questions here that maybe we could address. The first one is actually in relation to, you talked about harmonization and the necessity of following international standards. And we know some countries are very well evolved in applying good regulatory practices and through GRPs, bringing international standards into their day-to-day developing of regulations. How do you see at the WTO, according to the notifications that you assess through IPING, countries are becoming more mature? Are they bringing first notifications to you, to the WTO in relation to new regulations? And secondly, do you see the application per se of GRPs during their manufacturing, developing, and implementation of regulations by following international standards and applying some key elements of GRP, such as public consultation and notification to IPING and all the transparency mechanisms that we have. So it would be interesting for you, for us to listen. How do you see this going among countries when they notify to the WTO? Is this getting higher? What's your experience on that?
Thank you, Marina. And actually, notifications have increased. So they are going higher. It's not the other way around. The committee has proven to be so effective as a forum for members to exchange information about their regulations, of course. But as I mentioned, transparency is important for many reasons. It really encourages collaboration. It informs, it helps us being informed about the trends in terms of policymaking. And of course, it brings an opportunity to comment in an earlier stage. And for the member that is regulating, an opportunity to receive comments in an earlier stage. So what we see in these 30 years, it's that, and I can say that what I see from the members' perspective, the committee brings this, is this platform where we collaborate in terms of bringing solutions. So to your question, just coming again to the fact that notifications have increased, not the other way around, not the other way. And in terms of GRPs, it's such an important tool. I know that many members are developing guides, for example, in terms of good regulatory practice. Certainly, there is an opportunity for the committee, if members wish to do so, to address GRPs in a more in a multilateral conversation. I hope this can be another area where we can contribute from the committee perspective. I don't know if that's...
No, you touched directly into what I was thinking, which is the guide for GRP, because the guide for conformity assessment, this is another subject. I have a question for you, but before going there, I think a guide for GRP would be like a huge evolution or improvement of what we have on GRPs from the WTO and for countries to apply. And one of the coalition's work is actually trying to engage countries into a standard operating procedure on how to apply GRPs. We have been working with some countries trying to develop like a checklist where they could follow through while developing a regulation if they are following some phases of how to control transparency, how harmonize with international standards, how to bring this to the knowledge of the public and private sector and so on. So do you think it's feasible for us maybe to engage countries in relation to this next step of having a guide on GRP?
Well, we encourage always stakeholders to engage with the members in terms of bringing to them what you see as a priority, as an opportunity, and certainly GRPs or the development of a guide in terms of GRPs, an opportunity, and certainly it would be a good contribution if members see we are there. We had a conversation many years ago with regards to GRP. It is still a very important issue. We have 2 thematic sessions, if I'm not wrong, related to GRP, one related, for example, to also regional trade agreements, but it's certainly an issue that is of importance for members in the committee. So we always encourage stakeholders to go to their members and, of course, share their priorities.
And we have been talking, sorry, please go on.
No, I was saying, and of course, the experience, the specific experience with your sector, which of course brings a lot of lessons learned. You mentioned the coordination, for example, with the health authorities. That's itself a good, an important action practice in terms of coordination.
Yeah, and actually, we talked, I think, during the session on TBT at 30. And also in other meetings for the need, for example, for organizations like the WHO and the WTO to collaborate, because sometimes we see that GRPs within the other organizations could also be a subject to explore. So do you see any kind of space for the WTO to engage in a collaboration with other organizations such as the WHO on this matter of GRP and harmonization and transparency on the way the international organizations develop their own rules? I know it's not WTO's role to do that, and I understand that we are talking about a sensitive issue possibly, but maybe that would be a step further as well.
Thank you, Marina. I think we're in the hands of members. As a members-driven organization, of course, we listen and we're guided on where members want to go. But of course, coordination and collaboration, it's a pillar of our work. And what I can say is that, for example, to thematic session, members can propose always participation of stakeholders and experts, including experts from other organizations. So that's also something that it's always possible. And that, of course, can encourage an important conversation in that area.
I'm taking notes because then we can develop also internally on how to work on these issues. And I was going to ask you in relation to the guidelines on conformity assessment, if the TBT committee had or the secretariat of the WTO had like a plan to spread the guidelines through the countries and through the regulators, if there was any feedback on how they are using it. I understand it was a great achievement from the TBT committee, especially because it's a very important negotiation that was succeeded, and it was not easy, as I understand. So if you can talk a little bit on how is this developing or evolving with countries we have, and how can we also help to promote the guide through countries and bring knowledge on how the guide should be used and applied by regulators. I think that's the two sides questions. I mean, internally from the WTO, and on the other way, how can we also support and work for the guidelines to become more popular within regulators?
Thank you, Marina. And just coming back to the question on notifications, when you asked if they have increased just a number, more than 150 notifications on medical devices. We have that number in 2021. Happy to share more information about this. We can certainly send you later more information. And we have, just to mention, we have an amazing secretariat with a lot of expertise. In terms of the CAP guidelines, I think I would encourage, and I will be very grateful with the different stakeholders, and of course, you're welcome to promote guidelines within your communities. There is definitely a need to socialize the guidelines more. This is a super useful instrument, and we are always ready to give any information. Certainly the members are doing so also in their constituencies, but we encourage the coalition to promote the guidelines in your communities, and let us know how we can help, of course.
Okay, no, we will do that, because actually in our sector, we have an issue sometimes on the regulation. Sometimes is very well drafted, but when it comes to conformity assessment of that regulation, sometimes we have problems. So the guidelines on conformity assessment becomes a very important tool for us, and that's why we've been following this carefully.
Yeah, I was very happy to be in person in technical assistance activity in my country. So I was there with the secretariat, and the secretariat, of course, doing the technical assistance activities. If the members include, for example, CAP guidelines as a priority, and that was the case for Ecuador, we had the first exercise about the CAP guidelines, and certainly the secretariat developed a great exercise, very practical in that regard. So just to add to the work of promotion, there's also the work through technical assistance activities that the secretariat does with developing members. And as I say, for Ecuador, it was extremely useful to have this understanding, because there are very specific questions, yeah, and of course matters that you can only tackle through these activities, and it requires, in this case, in some cases, technical assistance. So I wanted to bring that perspective, because I was there, and certainly the institutions in my country were very grateful, and will make a very good use on this knowledge.
And I think also the WTO now will play a very important role on technical assistance and it still does. It has been doing in the past years, but I think it can become even more important to have this kind of technical assistance. Last year, the WTO Secretariat came to Rio to give a very big regional taller on TBT issues, and we were there as well. And I think by having, for example, a CAP guideline session to regulators and the servants that apply those caps, I think that would be really, really a very big contribution from the WTO. So that's why for us is also important to spread the guidelines and to make them more willing to have you and the WTO and the Secretariat doing this kind of technical assistance work. I think that's important.
No, and I agree. It's a great idea to have for the Secretariat to work more on socializing CAP guidelines.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And do you have any comments, specifically to the medical device sector when it comes, for example, to reliance? And you saw, Sandra, during the thematic session, I think reliance is a very, very important, I would say the most important tool we have for our sector. And I think the support of the WTO for this tool, it's something very, very important for the sector to evolve in terms of having more products accessible to more patients throughout the world. So as a final comment from your side, because it's been really, really important for us to have you here today, it would be interesting to get a little bit of your impression on the thematic session, and Sandra's thoughts on reliance and how the WTO could support that, and how do you see members accepting this tool. I think that would be interesting, because the thematic session was, in the end of the day, something directed to countries, and for us, understanding what are they thinking about the tools, it's a very important message. So maybe you can just bring a little bit to our members that are here and that did not participate of the thematic session directly.
No, great. Just to start with the thematic session, all of our thematic sessions are live stream, and there is always the opportunity to revisit them through the website. It was certainly a very useful and amazing, I think, thematic session, and you can ask any member of the committee. It was extremely useful and a great contribution to the work. So there was a broad agreement on many issues. So perhaps I can share some takeaways, Marina, in terms of what the thematic session brought to the committee. So first, there was broad agreement that we need to avoid duplication of efforts. And you brought that point also with the point about collaboration and cooperation, including with other international organizations and processes. And in this aspect, of course, regulators can utilize different tools. There is, just give me a second, I'm coming back to the takeaways of the session. Regulators could utilize regulatory reliance by, for example, unilaterally granting authorizations for medical devices approved in other countries, or establishing bilateral and multilateral recognition systems. So that was clearly one of the takeaways. In this context, it was also noted that regulatory reliance should not be viewed as a loss of autonomy, but rather as a strategic tool that enables regulators, especially those with limited resources, to prioritize high-risk areas and streamline market access. One important thing is that both developed and developing members from different regions share their experience with utilizing reliance mechanisms. I think the thematic session was well represented by experts from different regions. We had experts from Latin America, from the African region, Asia, and also developed countries. So it was a great, I cannot stress more, it was super useful, extremely good thematic session. So they share their experience with utilizing reliance mechanism, including during the COVID pandemic, and also for HIV responses. This was extremely useful to understand. These both emergencies have impacted us all. So it was extremely useful to listen on these different experiences. And as I had noted in the session, this aligns with the committee 2024 CAP guidelines suggestion that regulators may consider opportunities to rely on the work of other trusted regulators in order to make the best use of available resources. And these were some of the takeaways of the thematic session. And of course, the TBT agreement encourages reliance, as I have already mentioned in my previous intervention. Reliance is one of the points, of course, in the CAP guidelines and very important to the work of the committee in this and other sectors. But you are certainly setting an example with the great collaboration and through the work of the coalition and the participation, of course, in our work, including the thematic sessions.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you for your words and for bringing the takeaways. We have the link also for the thematic session. I think Sandra has a comment. Sandra, please.
Thank you very much. And I was supposed to be using the Q&A feature, but as host of the session, I cannot have access to the Q&A, so sorry for that. Daniela, thank you very much. I think it has been really, really great to listen from you. And I would like to explore a little bit more on how has been the experience of the TBT committee in regards of activities related to dealing with specific trade concerns as compared to dealing with a more like preventive type of activities with draft regulations being more aligned with international standards that do not represent or do not include potential technical barriers to trade. How do you see that evolving?
Well, those are both important tools, important moments, important areas of the committee's work. What can I have seen during this year that there's more and more participation in different areas when you talk about those areas that can prevent or that can perhaps go into the regulatory cooperation area. And there is a lot of work in terms of transparency, for example, and there is a lot of things happening through the thematic sessions. We have innovated now the way that thematic sessions are conducted because we have a lot of interest. We have 27, if I'm not wrong, thematic session scheduled this year, and this shows the interest of members and the number of areas that members want to address. So they have decided, all of the members, to address them all. This as one area to address a specific areas with regard to sectors or with regard to a specific parts of the agreement. So there is a lot of things happening in that area. We also have an important work in transparency. There is a group of countries working in making recommendations for the committee in terms of how we can improve the tools that we have and how we can improve our transparency methods to improve the ways that members to improve our work, but also to make it easier. And transparency, of course, always helps the work of the committee. In terms of the SDCs, members indeed bring specific trade concerns on medical devices. For example, issues could be that members bring insufficient number of conformity assessment bodies accredited to certify and test medical devices, insufficient number of implementing acts providing detailed guidance on compliance, but indeed members could also resolve issues and difference via inquiry points and other transparency mechanisms like commenting process. So we see the medical devices being addressed in different areas. And when I talk about the contact amongst inquiry points, what I can see is that your community, you know a lot, you know who is in the community, you know each other. And that has helped a lot in terms of what you say about prevention, prevent things from becoming a concern. But even when things become a concern, it's a good way also to understand, to bring to the committee information, to understand each other. So it's still a stage when things can be resolved. Sorry to talk a lot. I think you brought a question about these different mechanisms that members use to resolve concerns, to understand better what regulators are doing, to comment, to participate in policy processes that are certainly impacting trade. I'm not sure if we have a specific information about the medical devices sector in terms of how members resolve differences among themselves outside the committee, but that will be important to know as well. And those things always happen, and I'm sure there is a lot of things happening out of the committee. There's more beyond, but of course, encouraged by the agreement and the committee's work itself. And your amazing work, Sandra. I was very happy to see you both, Sandra and Marina, also in the anniversary of the TBT agreement, 30 years. It was so important, and we had a panel full of women. That was amazing. So it was.
It was great, and also the DG came in the end of the meeting, the session. So it was very, very interesting. For me,
Yeah,
it was very emotional. Like, yeah, working on that. PhD on TBT, and then TBT at 30, and then with the DG there, it was very important.
I can tell you, I've been working in several committees in the WTO. I haven't seen any other committee with such number. I mean, there is a number of women devoted to this work with this expertise. So it has been a pleasure for me, and you both, meeting you, getting to know you, it has been amazing. So I was very glad to receive this invitation today.
Sandra, thank you, and Daniela, thank you. It was amazing. It was very important for us to have you here, and we were very happy. We were commenting, Sandra and I, with the team, how happy we were when you said yes, and you were so happy to be here as well. So it's reciprocal. And with that in mind, I would like to thank you for your participation here today, for your comments. We will be in touch. We will exchange, of course, for sure, information and outcomes and ideas on how to keep working on the TBT committee and with the TBT committee. You are a very strategical tool for us. And with that in mind, I'll pass the floor to, if you don't have any other comments, I'll pass the floor to Sandra to go on with the session.
Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you very much, Daniela. And yes, we are leaving this part of our session today with a feeling of even further encouragement for us to continue working in collaboration with the TBT committee. We understand that there is still a lot more that we can continue to learn, and a lot more we can continue to do to spread the word among all relevant stakeholders, so we can all benefit out of everything that the TBT committee is doing. And without further ado, I'd like to open the floor for Stephen Bipes to share with us another very relevant topic right now related to trade. So, Stephen, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra and Marina and Daniela. I echo the coalition's great gratitude to you for connecting with us here today and being such a strong supporter at the global level of everything that we in the medical technology sector do to identify and eliminate every type of barrier and technical barriers to trade and patients. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stephen Bipes, Vice President at the American National at the Advanced Medical Technology Association, AdvaMed, and a member of the coalition and the executive committee. And this is certainly the message that Daniela relayed is important, not just on the content, but also in helping to make the connection between the important work of the WTO and the TBT agreement with the Latin American Western Hemispheric region. I've been spending a good portion of my time this year on tariff-related matters, but I thought it would be helpful to take this opportunity to build off of Daniela's presentation and excellent remarks to review with all of our external and internal stakeholders the work of the coalition in the context of global trade, and in particular to remind ourselves where medical device regulatory convergence and reliance relate to trade in general and to the WTO and the TBT agreement and commitments in particular. Prior to the launch of the coalition and during the pandemic in 2020, the members of the coalition already worked together to address and minimize the various barriers to patient access to medtech. And these barriers take many different forms: tax, tariff, customs, import licensing, regulatory, including standards and conformity assessment, access, payment, reimbursement, procurement, and also ethical barriers. And we like to and try to frame these barriers in trade terms when we're speaking with trade authorities. These four numbers are 5, 10, 20, 30, where the average global tariff pre-2025 was 5%. In countries like the United States, it was closer to 2.5%. In some other regions, maybe like Brazil and Ecuador, more like 10, 11%, 8%. But the average global for all products, including medical devices, is 5%. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that's changed in the current dynamic. But the costs of inefficient customs procedures bring a tariff equivalent of a 10% import tariff, and duplicative regulatory costs are equivalent to a 20% import tariff. And the lack of consistently enforced anti-corruption measures and the lack of ethical conduct in either public or private sector can bring costs, depending on the jurisdiction, between 10 and 30% tariff equivalent. So although tariffs are a patient barrier and a trade barrier, the non-tariff barriers are equivalent to 40 to 60% tariff equivalent, 8 to 12 times the tariff average. And so for this reason, this coalition has been dedicated towards addressing the non-tariff barriers that are technical barriers to trade that result from the regulatory space. And there is a number of tools in the WTO and trade toolboxes to address these various challenges and these barriers. On tariffs, there's of course tariff negotiations in the most favored nation, tax rate, and various other regional and sub-regional bilateral agreements. On customs, there's the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement, the TFA. On regulatory, our strongest tool, as we're talking about and focusing on today, is the WTO Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, the TBT. On procurement, we've got the WTO Government Procurement Agreement. There's many other trade tools, of course, TRIPS for IP, SPS for sanitary and phytosanitary. But in terms of medical technology, I'd say these are kind of the main tools, trade tools in the toolbox. And I would also note that there's other non-trade tools we have. For example, in procurement, the World Bank value for money principle in the context of value-based procurement. On ethics, we've got the good guidance from OECD, United Nations, and APEC on ethical enablers that apply to both value-based procurement and ethical conduct. But we're talking today about WT and technical barriers to trade. And so the challenge is that duplicative regulatory costs derive from national technical regulations that are overly trade restrictive because they're not based upon international standards and global conformity assessment procedures, and they may therefore constitute technical barriers to trade and health, which are non-tariff barriers. So as you look at the media these days and the discussions on tariff and non-tariff barriers, you hear that acronym, NTBs, non-tariff barriers. Those include the TBTs, the technical barriers to trade, that for our sector primarily and predominantly derive from the lack of aligned technical regulations. And what do we do about it? This is our challenge. The solution can be, and it's right in front of us, as Daniela highlighted, that duplicative regulatory costs may be minimized by having national technical regulations be not more trade restrictive than necessary by basing them upon international standards and global conformity assessment procedures and practices, and thereby preventing and removing technical barriers to trade and health. And all of these are non-tariff barriers. So we're working together, whether you know it or not. We are all working already on minimizing barriers to patients and barriers to trade. And the main space that this coalition works on is a non-tariff barriers that are technical barriers to trade and health and patients. So the recommendations that we feel it's valid sharing both with our external stakeholders and never too much with our internal stakeholders, being the MedTech associations of the Western Hemisphere and our member companies, is to familiarize yourself with the WTO TBT agreement. If you've not yet read it, it's really not too long. You can sit down and like, as we like to say, brew a pot of tea or coffee, go through it. Use the ePing system. It's a marvelous tool to be able to track all of the notifications to the WTO on the draft and final measures for all regulated sectors, including medical devices, for the jurisdictions of your key markets. We encourage you to develop comments and develop specific trade concerns where necessary, leverage the tool of the trade commitment, be engaged in international and national medtech standardization efforts, and we will share the deck. And here at LinkedIn, we have the links to the agreement, the EPING system, and the list of international standards committees that develop the standards for the medtech sector. We encourage all the private sector entities to include TBT standards and conformity assessment considerations in domestic public consultations that you may have and your various engagements and meetings with the regulatory authorities. The health authorities are very busy with their health mandates. They're very heads down. They often they don't want to step on the toes and stay out of the lane of their trade ministry colleagues. But as was emphasized at a thematic session a couple of years ago at the WTO, even trade authorities and national regulatory authorities have trade obligations, in particular to follow and comply and comport with the WTO TBT agreement. And that includes using international standards and conformity assessment as bases for national requirements. And finally, final private sector recommendation is for all of our member associations and companies to be coherent, aligning any comments they submit domestically with comments that they submit internationally and vice versa. On the other side, we also have recommendations for public authorities, where we encourage the governments to implement whole of government good regulatory practice policies, as has been done in many jurisdictions. Brazil, Ecuador, Mexico has good requirements in place. Canada, the US, others are looking at it. And at the 2022 Summit of the Americas, we had the declaration from the 24 trade ministers of the Americas convened on good regulatory practices. And so we encourage the governments to move forward with that recommendation and employ GRP as a whole of government interministerial requirement, and including such things as regulatory impact assessments. We recommend that the governments implement and the regulatory authorities implement standard operating procedures, and both at regulatory agencies and other government bodies that, for example, develop conformity assessment criteria that implement GRP and TBT commitments. We encourage the government partners as well to be engaged in international and national medtech standardization. The rules of these international standard development bodies, be it ISO, IEC, IEEE, others, CLSI, ASTM, they must be open to all relevant stakeholders. And that includes government, includes patients, includes industry. And the standards and the technical regulations don't write themselves. And it really does require a whole of industry and a whole of stakeholder effort to develop appropriate and globally aligned and minimally trade intruding or obstructive technical regulations. We encourage our government colleagues to base national technical regulations and conformity assessment procedures on the international standards and global conformity assessment practices that are developed, to notify all draft and final measures to the World Trade Organization, and to modify draft measures based on comments received to comport with the commitments that have been made to the WTO. So I would use this opportunity to make the plea, make the request, help us minimize barriers, help us in our efforts that began prior to the pandemic, prior to the current trade discussions, help us minimize every type of barrier between patients and the life-saving and life-improving medical technologies of our member company manufacturers and exporters, and help us minimize these barriers that are barriers to medical technology trade, to medical technology market authorization, to medical technology supply chains, global health systems, global health emergency preparedness, and most importantly, patient access. All of this is geared around our efforts to identify and minimize every type of barrier listed here between the patients and these life-saving and life-improving medical technologies. I'll close there, Sandra, and would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much for your remarks. I think that we have focused a lot of our efforts on the technical aspects, and having all relevant stakeholders understanding how all these technical aspects may turn into either facilitators or preventing patients to have access to medical technologies. And I see really very gladly that in this past 5 years, national regulatory authorities in the health sector are way much more familiar with their role in regards of supporting trade as part of making sure that they are complying with their obligations in regards of the health of the populations. So in that regard, is there anything that you see from the global perspective, thinking probably, I know AdvaMed is a member of GMTA the same way as the coalition is a member of GMTA. How do you see the global community perceiving this situation? Do you think that everybody is aligning that, yes, we're moving in the right direction? Or do you see that there are things that need to happen differently so we can kind of like course correct if necessary?
And are you speaking, Sandra, principally of non-tariff barriers?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, non-tariff barriers.
It was very heartening at the thematic session, the most recent one, following your panel, to see the comments that came from the floor, and across the 160, 70 plus WTO members, there wasn't a single member who stood up or commented to the contrary. Everyone's on the same page in terms of using international standards, using globally aligned conformity assessment, minimizing barriers to trade, and there's an increasing understanding of how those barriers to trade are supply chain barriers and global health barriers and patient barriers. I think the message has been received for the most part with the people that go to Geneva to the TBT meeting, and at least for the regulatory authorities that accompany their trade colleagues to the meetings. Where I think we continue to see a challenge is in some jurisdictions where there's stovepiping and there's not a great level of connectivity between the health authorities and the trade authorities, which is where the capacity building that we've conducted the last few years with your support and the whole support of this coalition and the Secretariat across Latin America, as well as in Africa and Southeast Asia, to making those connections and beginning with the carrot and not the stick, starting with, here is the good relevant documents at the global level for frameworks for health regulators, be it from the WHO, be it from the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, be it international standards, and even looking at documents like the WHO Good Regulatory Practices document, encouraging the regulator to ensure, first and foremost, that they're complying with their legal obligations and legal frameworks. And it's just an unknown factor for many of the health authorities that it's an international binding treaty obligation to comply with the TBT agreement, including Articles 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, Article 5. And so I would say, to answer your question, there's a growing consensus, yes, this is the direction we need to move. And I think that what can help is us focusing on the core message of, I love the saying, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it. So we really need to have a goal of, we're going to create 0 national technical regulations that are not based upon international standards conformity assessment. That really needs to be the goal. Of course, the countries have their own sovereignty to exceptions to that as permitted under the TBT agreement and as required. But in my experience, my 9 years at AdvaMed and with the coalition, I have yet to come across a technical regulation or a practice at the national level that was justified based on the particularity of within the country, and where full compliance and implementation of the TBT agreement would have prevented the unnecessary barrier to trade and to patient health. So I say that the outlook is good. We're moving in the right direction, but I would say we could probably move at a faster pace, and having the WTO TBT recognize the importance of this sector and having opportunities like this one with Daniela to emphasize that connection really help us in that effort.
Stephen, thank you very much. And just probably a very final question. You mentioned ethics at the beginning of your presentation. So how do you see ethics becoming more and more important in and the impact of ethics in regards of facilitating or preventing access of patients to medical devices?
Thanks for that question. And of course, this coalition is a partner to our other MedTech coalition in the Americas on business ethics. And we've long highlighted the relationship between transparency and regulatory. And I'll wear now my hat as the co-chair of the Americas Business Dialogue Transparency and Regulatory Working Group to emphasize this joint message. We're often oriented by what the former Minister of Transparency in Colombia said at the Andy Medical Device Forum, where he noted that the longer it takes any government entity to comply with its mandate, and the more that it deviates from the use of international standards and practices, the higher the perception and margin for unethical conduct. So value of complying with the TBT agreement is not just on very narrow technical issues. It has benefits in the transparency and the ethics sphere by promoting and supporting improved transparency and public administration. And so there's a very connected link there. And so it's important not just from performance, safety, and those are key, but it's also in alignment with our effort to have a global rules-based system and to have the rules be very clear and transparent and predictable and stable to minimize all of the drivers that drive unethical conduct, be it in the private or the public sector.
Stephen, thank you very much. I think this is always relevant, even though everything that we do is supported by an ethical framework. It is always important to kind of like bring it back to the attention when we are just exchanging all these experiences and all this knowledge. So really, thank you very much. And we're getting to the end of our session today. We're going to continue with our internal session to celebrate our 5th anniversary tomorrow with our members. And for closing, I'd also like to invite you to share just a few comments for our audience.
Sandra, do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions. Sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There it is one, and I was about to miss it. My apologies for this. So hi all. In the meantime, I have seen the same evolution in terms of regulators to understand the relevance on patient barriers, but also on contribution to commerce. I think we have in some countries a very good opportunity of taking advantage of many initiatives from regulators to adjust local legislations and standards. So it is important we to continue bringing the most impactful changes we see on local legislations. Is this the same thing seen since the coalition perspective? Any additional recommendation based on what you have seen with the international regulators representation? And this is from an anonymous attendee. Thank you.
It seems like that is in line with the direction that the coalition is moving. Now, when we talk, the WTO TBT definition of a technical regulation is any document, and it's got a whole bunch of qualifying criteria, but that is with which compliance is mandatory. And in some jurisdictions, legislation is separated out. But from a holistic perspective, we consider that mandatory measures, technical, legislation, technical regulation should be globally aligned. But we at, Sandra, yourself, and Leticia and Marina in the technical secretariat, we have very limited bandwidth, and it's not really our function to try and solve the problems of the world. It's to help our member associations and companies do that work. So I would say that in one of the tasks of the coalition members that we've been doing, and we can always do better, is to be attentive to which legislation, pieces of legislation are being developed, and to participate in the relevant public sessions to shape them in alignment with global rules and with rules that support medtech and patient access. And that's true on the legislative side, as well as on the regulatory side, as well as on the conformity assessment side. And I know that's a fine nuance and distinction, but when you read the TBT agreement, you see that conformity assessment is not a technical regulation, it's a separate category. And we need to make sure that both the technical regulations and the conformity assessment criteria are globally aligned. So yes, absolutely, the coalition, from my view, supports that. And we seek the continuing support of the member associations and members to advance that work at the national level.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I don't see any additional questions here in the Q&A. If you could help us with some closing comments for this session, and then Marina is also going to help us with a few words. Thank you.
Well, again, thanks to you both and Daniela for joining us today for this external session. We had very much wanted to make it hybrid in person, and we'll have to have a larger in-person meeting when we can. We're still looking at potentially doing that with all the stakeholders together at the end of the year in conjunction with the Summit of the Americas. We need to get through some of this tariff turbulence, I think, to be able to make some decisions there. But it really is important, and I wish to highlight the collaboration and strong cooperation we have between the public and private sectors in this effort to identify and minimize the various non-tariff barriers where this coalition is focused on the NTBs that derive from unnecessarily duplicative technical regulations, conformity assessment measures, and standards. So thanks again to everyone. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Marina.
Sandra, thank you for the space that you're giving me to give this final comment. I think it's really important in this moment that we are living now. I think it's important to have like a final message of reminder. In difficult times, such as the ones that we are really now, sometimes we prioritize subjects, and that's natural because we have to take care of emergencies. However, we must not forget the medium and long-term investments that basically build the lines for us to work on these priorities now. Because the work that the coalition does is the kind of work that allow us to be in touch with authorities, because we have a positive agenda and we have a positive message to bring them into a better stage of their work. So when we have a difficult time and when they have a difficult time, we are there and we can knock on their doors and they will be paying attention to our thoughts because we've been taking care of them, so to speak, during the whole period. So we are not a tactics coalition, we are a strategic coalition. So my final message for companies and associations that are working with us is that that's the time where we must be more engaged. And that's the time where we have to be together working in this positive agenda, because when we have a difficult situation, it's this agenda that supports us in front of authorities. And I think it's incredible the work that the coalition has been doing. And it's a very important message that we have a very brilliant agenda for the next 5 years. And thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this team.
Marina, thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much. Just making some very, very final comments. For the first, I really, really want to thank all stakeholders that had been supportive and trusting on the work that we have done in these past 5 years. Without the support of wonderful, tremendous experts in many, many different areas within the companies, within national regulatory authorities, within international organizations, as the World Trade Organization, as the World Health Organization, as American Business Dialogue, etc., 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 we would not have been able to reach the stage where we are now. And echoing what Marina is mentioning, I mean, we are here to help. We are partners. And this partnership works in two directions. We are feeding our members with information, with tools, with position papers, and we are being fed by our members to understand what are the priorities, what are the areas that they need us to be working on. And we receive feedback from national regulatory authorities and international institutions on what they are expecting from us, how we can contribute to produce a world that will enable all patients all over the globe to have access to the medical devices that they need in order to maintain their health or recover their health. So with this, really thank you very much for your support. We're looking forward to continue working together, working for you, as Marina is mentioning. Now we're looking for the next 5 years, but for as many years as it is required. So thank you very much. And I'm just also going to read a comment from Denise Bruce. She's mentioning, thanks for the session and congratulations for all for the brilliant work you do. Thank you very much, Denise, for your comments. Thank you for your collaboration, and look forward to meet with all the coalition members tomorrow to continue the celebration and to continue to plan for the future. And also another message from Jimena Huisi from Amit. This is not a question, but congrats for the 5th anniversary of the coalition. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day wherever you are located in the world. Thank you very much.
Everyone, bye-bye.